Right, so Keir Starmer's just figured out that declaring war on farmers might not be the political masterstroke he thought it was. Who knew? Oh, wait, literally everyone except number 10, apparently. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we cut through the Westminster waffle and give you the real story. I'm your host, and today we're diving into Labour's spectacular U-turn on the family farm tax, a policy so monumentally unpopular that even the government's own analysis said it would cost more than it raised. Yes, you heard that right. They created a tax that loses money. That's like opening a shop that pays customers to take things. Absolute genius. So, here's what's happened. After months of farmers protesting, the Daily Express campaigning, and pretty much everyone with two brain cells pointing out this was a disaster, the government has finally blinked. On Tuesday, they announced they're raising the threshold for agricultural property and business property relief from 1 million to 2.5 million quid. Progress, right? Well, sort of. It's like someone's been hitting you with a baseball bat for 6 months, and now they've switched to a cricket bat and expect you to be grateful. Let's rewind a bit and talk about how we got here, because this story is absolutely wild. Back in November, Rachel Reeves stood up at the dispatch box, looked the country in the eye, and announced that inheritance tax relief for farms would be slashed. The agricultural community collectively lost its mind, and rightfully so. These aren't massive corporations dodging taxes through offshore accounts. These are families who've worked the same land for generations, trying to pass it on to their kids without the taxman taking half of it. Now, inheritance tax on farms sounds reasonable if you're sat in a London coffee shop reading The Guardian, sipping your oat milk latte, thinking farmers are all rolling in money with massive Range Rovers and shooting parties every weekend. But here's the reality check. Most farmers are asset rich and cash poor. They own land worth millions on paper, but their actual income is often below minimum wage. Taxing them on the value of their land is like taxing someone on the value of their house while they're earning 12 grand a year. It doesn't work. It forces sales, breaks up family businesses, and ultimately damages our food security. But did the government listen? Did they heck? Instead, they doubled down. And I mean properly doubled down. We had Keir Starmer himself, the Prime Minister, standing there saying voters had to choose between a stable NHS or inheritance tax breaks for farmers. As if those two things are connected. As if the 20 million quid this tax might raise, assuming it doesn't lose money, which it probably will, could somehow fix the NHS. That's like saying you can't have a new roof because you need to buy a packet of paracetamol. The numbers don't even begin to add up. And here's where it gets absolutely bonkers. The government's own analysis, their own numbers, showed that this family farm tax would cost the Treasury more than it would generate. Let me say that again for the people at the back. It was a tax that would lose money. So not only were they attacking family farms for no good reason, they were doing it while making the country poorer. That's not policy, that's performance art. Bad performance art. But wait, it gets better. HMRC, those lovable rogues at Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, were so proud of this absolute shambles that they gave a special award to the civil servant who came up with it. I'm not making this up. Somewhere in a government building, there's a bloke with a certificate on his wall celebrating the creation of a policy that sparked mass protests, threatened food security, and lost money. That's the kind of backwards thinking that makes you wonder if Whitehall is actually a comedy writer's room. So, while the government was busy patting itself on the back, farmers were descending on Westminster from every corner of the country. Tractors blocking streets, placards in the air, genuine anger from people who don't usually get involved in protests. These aren't your professional activists who turn up to everything with a megaphone and a list of demands. These are working people who've been pushed too far. The Daily Express, fair play to them, has been leading the charge on this campaign. Day after day, front pages highlighting the devastation this policy would cause. Real stories from real farmers facing real consequences. And slowly, ever so slowly, the pressure started to build. But Labour MPs, most of them just fell in line like obedient little lobby fodder. A few weeks ago, the vast majority of Labour backbenchers voted for the budget motion including this inheritance tax raid. Some brave souls abstained, and one MP, Marcus Campbell-Savers from Penrith and Solway, actually had the courage to vote against it. And what happened to him? The whip was removed. He was kicked out of the parliamentary party for representing his constituents and standing up for what he believed was right. In modern Labour, apparently, that's a sackable offence. Now, let's talk about what this says about Labour's relationship with rural Britain, because it's not pretty. The farm tax isn't happening in isolation. Oh no, this is part of a pattern that's got rural communities genuinely worried about whether this government understands them at all, or frankly gives a toss. We've got policies threatening village pubs, those vital community hubs that are already hanging on by a thread. We've got plans to limit shotgun ownership, which sounds reasonable if you've never been to the countryside, but is actually attacking legitimate pest control and rural livelihoods. And then there's the trail hunting ban, which will devastate rural economies that depend on these activities. Put it all together and you've got what looks like a government that's actively hostile to rural life. And here's the thing, perception matters in politics. Doesn't matter if Labour thinks they're being fair or progressive or whatever. What matters is that millions in rural constituencies are looking at this pattern and thinking, hang on, this lot are coming after us. That's political toxic. Rural seats delivered Labour's majority. Red wall constituencies, small towns, villages, these places trusted Labour to govern for everyone. And what did they get? A series of policies that feel like punishment. So, we come to Tuesday's announcement. The government raises the threshold to 2.5 million quid. It's something, it'll help, but it's also a bit like setting someone's house on fire and then offering them a bucket of water. Technically helpful, but you're still the one who started the fire, mate. What's fascinating here is the timing. Why now? Why after months of protests and criticism, and your own MPs rebelling? The answer seems to be that someone, somewhere in number 10, finally looked at the polling and realised that the war on the country label was sticking, and that label is political poison. You can survive being called anti-business or too left-wing or whatever, but being seen as anti-food producers with rural communities that just want to be left alone, that's the kind of reputation that follows you to the ballot box and kicks you in the teeth. Keir Starmer has clearly realised this is toxic. The question is whether this partial U-turn is genuine reflection or just damage control. Has Labour actually learned that you can't govern against entire communities, or are they just scared of the electoral consequences? My money's on the latter, but I'm a cynic. Here's what should have happened. Before announcing this policy, someone should have actually talked to farmers. Revolutionary concept, I know. They should have modelled the real-world impact, not just looked at theoretical revenue. They should have considered food security, family businesses, rural culture, all of it. Instead, they cooked up a policy in Westminster, announced it with no consultation, and then acted surprised when it blew up in their faces. The fundamental problem here is that this government doesn't understand rural Britain. They don't get the economics, they don't get the culture, and they don't seem to think it matters. There's this assumption that farmers are wealthy landowners who need to pay their fair share, when the reality is completely different. Most farmers are working longer hours for less money than people in cities, dealing with unpredictable weather, volatile markets, and now a government that seems to be determined to make their lives harder. And let's be clear about what's at stake here. This isn't just about inheritance tax or shotgun licenses or hunting. This is about whether Britain values its rural communities and understands that food security isn't something you can just import your way out of. Every farm that gets broken up and sold off because of inheritance tax is food production we lose. Every rural business that closes because of poorly thought-through policies is jobs and community gone. This stuff matters. The government has a long way to rebuild trust. Raising the threshold is a start, but it's not enough. Marcus Campbell-Savers deserves a public apology and the whip restored. Farmers deserve proper consultation on policies that affect them, and rural Britain deserves a government that actually values what they do instead of treating them like an inconvenient voting bloc that needs to be managed. What this whole saga tells us is that Labour hasn't figured out how to govern for the whole country. They're comfortable with
with their urban base, they understand city voters, but step outside the M25 and they're lost. That's a massive problem for a party that won a landslide by convincing rural and small-town Britain to trust them. Trust is easy to lose and hard to rebuild, and right now, that trust is hanging by a thread. So, is this the end of the war on the countryside? Only time will tell. The partial U-turn suggests someone in government has finally woken up to the political danger, but one concession doesn't undo months of terrible policy and worse communication. Rural communities will be watching carefully to see whether this is genuine change or just tactical retreat. The lesson here should be obvious. Don't pick fights you don't need to have. Don't create policies that lose money while attacking your own voters. And maybe, just maybe, talk to people before you completely upend their lives and livelihoods. Radical concepts, apparently, for modern government. Right, that's where we are. Labour's partially climbed down on the farm tax after months of unnecessary chaos, Keir Starmer's worried about being seen as anti-countryside, and rural Britain is left wondering whether this government has learned anything or whether this is just a brief pause in hostilities. If you want to stay on top of all the political chaos, the U-turns and the Westminster madness, make sure you're subscribed to UK Political Insight, because we post multiple times a day with all the latest developments. Hit that like button if you think Labour has handled this like a complete